Again, my name is Nick Mortensen, and I'm actually one of the partners here at Eide. Specifically, my focus is business process automation. And so I live over on the technology side, and I work very closely with, the Salesforce team and the cybersecurity team and the data analytics team, because it's all very, very closely tied together. But I'll touch more on that in a little bit. I currently reside in Austin, Texas, and yeah, I'm excited to be here, talk with you guys a little bit about kind of what automation can do to help with your organization. So first, wanted to give just a super quick blurb on Eide Bailly and kind of who we are. So we're, tax and accounting firm founded in 1917. This particular slide, though, because I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with our tax and accounting side of the house, I want to talk a little bit more about the technology side, which is where I reside. So on the technology side of the house, we've got over 200 consultants across the country, and we're not tied to offices. So we've got people in New York and Florida and Kentucky and all over on the east side of the country, as well as obviously in the west. And we do kind of what you would consider, full scope of technology consulting. So if you see on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen here, we've got an ERP practice, we've got a CRM practice, we do integrations and automations, which those are the two things that I kind of specialize in. We have cybersecurity, we've got data analytics, we've got just general consulting. All that sort of stuff kind of resides in our technology consulting side of the house. So I don't want to belabor anything here. I just kind of wanted to give you a very brief introduction and essentially help you all understand that Eide Bailly does have a pretty large and robust technology consulting practice, and we don't dabble in these things either. Right? So NetSuite is a leading cloud ERP that is now underneath Oracle, and we have been the partner of the year in North America 6 out of the last 7 years. So again, the point here is we don't dabble in this stuff. We take it very seriously. We're very good at what we do. And so hopefully that little snapshot helps you understand a little bit better kind of the scope and depth of Eide Bailly's expertise. So today, here's kind of the agenda. So I want to start by going over some of the trends that we're seeing in the market right now. And specifically, I want to talk about, because, most of the research out there is skewing, like everything is tied back to kind of the private sector. But what about nonprofit, right? What about, I shouldn't say private sector, I should say for-profit businesses, right? Well, it's a slightly different perspective when you start looking through the lens of a nonprofit. So specifically with those market trends, how is that affecting the nonprofit sector? Then I want to talk a little bit about automation and what the value that it is, the value that it can bring to the table, and again, through that nonprofit lens. Specifically, we're going to talk about how it can make you faster, more agile, and more accurate. And then the meat of the presentation is going to come here at the end. I've got 3 use cases of things that other nonprofits have done that we've kind of helped out with. So that way you can kind of start, right? It's like, okay, we understand the problems. We understand what automation can do. How can I use these tools to solve certain problems? What does that actually look like when the rubber meets the road? So that's what those use cases will be. And then I kind of want to finish with some tips and tricks, right? Some of like the common mistakes or pitfalls that we see on the consulting side when people are engaging in these automation type projects. So just a few little tips and pointers on how your projects can be, more likely to be successful. So hopefully all that makes sense. Another thing I wanted to add, nobody wants to hear me monologue. So if you've got questions, I really hope and encourage you to throw your questions in the chat feature as soon as those questions pop into your head. And I've asked Mai to help me As soon as she sees a question, I've asked her to interrupt me and tell me what the question is. I want to be engaged and active. I don't want to, again, I don't just want to sit here and drone on. So please feel free to ask questions as soon as they pop into your head. All right, so some of the trends right now in the market. So current market conditions are leading to four major pain points in the eyes of the traditional company leadership. With interest rates going up, it's just more expensive to do business now than it ever has been. Obviously, that weighs pretty heavy on everybody's mind, right? Supplies and services and everything that you need to run your organization are more expensive now than they've ever been. Next is people, right? People concerns are huge. And I'll touch more on that in just a second. Third is technology, right? It's moving so fast. I may want to do something. I may want to get better. I may want to invest. I got no idea where to start, right? That's a very common issue. And frankly, the just starting, right, and investing has led to other issues, right? You can't there's nothing that you can do that doesn't have some sort of unintended consequence. Doesn't matter how good your intentions are, how good that thing that you're trying to do may be, there's always some sort of unintended consequence. And so talking a little bit about what those are and how we can mitigate those is part of what I'm going to be trying to touch on today. And then last is kind of the expectation of customers and your employees. And in the case of many nonprofits, your volunteers. So that total experience aspect is what that's a term Gartner has coined, but that's what it is. We'll touch on all these in more detail as we kind of clip through these. So this slide I thought was really interesting. This is a CNBC poll on kind of small business owners. And what's really interesting here is the flip-flop in what small business owners are considering a challenge. So the light blue bars are Q3 of 2021, and the dark blue bars are Q4 of 2021. And I know this slide's getting a little bit older, but the data and kind of what people are experiencing is staying exactly the same. Essentially, revenue has historically always been the biggest concern of any small business, right? Like, I gotta get money in the door, I gotta get sales. That is a concern. And what was really interesting is in one quarter, we saw flip-flop from revenue being the dominant thing to now, if you look at the dark blue bars on the bottom three, lack of applicants for job openings, employee retention, and employee well-being / morale. Those were the three biggest concerns, which are all employee-based. You add those together, that's 34%. Revenue has been reduced to 26% of what was consuming the minds of small business owners. So just like that, right, in one quarter, everything shifted from money to people, right? People being the biggest concern on the minds of small business owners. And frankly, that trend has continued. We are still seeing a lack of applicants for job openings and things like that. We're finding it harder to retain people, right? Churn has been higher now than it ever has been. And right, the mental health of our communities and our employees, that's right, that's top of mind for people as well. And so when you kind of look at all those things together, the burden that's placed on business owners, or in this case, right, people running a nonprofit, is like, gosh, I can't get people. And when I do get people, I'm burning them out really quickly. And how do I make sure that I can retain them and that the people are happy working here? Right? Those are kind of the main issues and challenges and questions that people are facing right now. This actually was a big part of it. So the distributed enterprise is what Gartner's calling it. It's a fancy word for saying people can work remotely now. And with the ability to work remote, that brings its own set of challenges, because where we used to just go into the office and turn around and ask somebody a question or walk down the hall and put a piece of paper on their desk. Can't do that anymore. Everything needs to be digital, which brings its own set of digital challenges. Things that used to be manual or things that used to be analog, so like paper-based, now have to be automated and digital, and that is a challenge. So this one is interesting, and this applies kind of across the board for employees, and for you guys, right? Your customers, generally speaking, you're more concerned about like the donor experience, right? And what Gartner has noted is that, in short, expectations have changed, right? So employees expect a better work experience, and it's easier now than ever for them to go find somewhere that's going to treat them well, to go find a job where they're doing kind of more meaningful work, or the work that they're doing is more enjoyable, right? Like the boring and monotonous parts of their job have been taken away from them, right? That's more engaging and exciting. And with the ability to hire remotely, the number of companies, like your application, like for an employer, my applicant pool is just opened up to be nationwide instead of historically what it was, I have to hire in this one geography. And so you have access to better talent, and that better talent has access to more jobs. And so the expectations of employees has shifted. Now, on the flip side, right, your customers and your donors, sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different, depending on the way your nonprofit is structured. They also have differing expectations. So I'm going to focus more kind of on that donor experience. Nobody wants it to be difficult to give you money, right? Like if I'm trying to give money away, if I'm trying to get people to give me money, gosh dang, I want that to be as easy as possible. I want it to be a smooth experience. I want there to be as few button clicks as possible. I want them to be able to do it on their phone, on their iPad, at the computer, on the phone, via text, via email. Like it shouldn't matter. And that's kind of what they're talking about here. So in that bottom left corner, they're talking about the multi-experience. That's what Gartner is referring to. The expectations of, in the case of nonprofits, our donors, has changed. They expect it to be easy, and the more frictionless the experience, the more donations you're going to get. And technology has been one of the main tools that people have leveraged in order to make the donor experience more seamless. All right, hyper automation, another stupidly drummed up fancy term for we need to use more than one tool or technology to do this, right? So there's a lot of different automations that need to happen, a lot of different places where we can kind of see a benefit from investing in automation. Gartner coined this term hyper automation. That's basically just use all of them. Don't just use RPA. Don't just use integration. Don't just use analytics, right? You got to use robotic process automation to consume data on PDFs and data in systems that have no API, where you're physically downloading a report and putting it into Excel and changing data. Don't do that anymore. Use RPA to automate the download. Use an integration tool to tie all your systems together and put your data into some sort of like a data warehouse where you have your analytics sitting on top of it and you get your reporting, right? It's all tied together. And that's what Gartner's saying is hyper automation, right? Like the tying together of holistic business process automation. So Gartner, this study was done about 6 to 9 months ago, I believe. And what Gartner said is by 2024, the diffuse hyper automation spending, so essentially people recognizing, gosh, remote work brought about challenges, and so investing in technology to enable remote work. I'm investing in technology to make it easier for my donors. I'm investing in technology to make it easier for my marketing department, for my accounting team, right? All of a sudden, right, I've recognized that investment in technology and systems, it's what enables me to support my people so that I can get the most out of the people that I have on staff, and I can get the donations that come in. I can do more good because I've reduced costs for automation, right? So all of a sudden people are spending on everything. And what they end up with is like a rat's nest of technology automations and solutions. And with that rat's nest comes the burden of trying to maintain all of that. So by 2024, Gartner is saying that total cost of ownership over your automation is going to increase 40-fold, not 40%, 40x. That's a very big increase. And there are things that you can do to drive that down. There's a lot of things you can do to drive that down. The other thing you have to recognize is that that increase is coming up, right? So like I used to spend this much on employees, turnover, training, and I used to spend this much on automation. So that 40-fold increase is, you're doing this, if you're seeing my screen, right? Like, so what you're spending on, you know, manual labor and documentation and robust training processes, that's coming down as your automation spend is going up, right? So that's a big part of what that 40-fold increase is. But, right, if I have the ability to, instead of, again, if you're watching my hands, instead of just flip-flopping, bringing that the 40-fold portion down, so I'm reducing spend and with a smaller increase in automation, I mean, obviously that's where you want to be, right? That's going to be the best result. And that's where you start to see a good return on the investments that you've made. That's the goal, right? And there are certain things that you can do to help with that, right? Control that cost that's going into all the automation that's required. So with that, we have our first polling question. So I'm curious to hear from you all, right? What challenges in the marketplace are you feeling the most right now? I'm going to give you all just a second to answer this here. And Maya, I don't know if you have the ability to see kind of when everybody's answered, but if you want to let me know when to switch, I'll go ahead and do that. I think we're probably got most everybody in by now. So, holy cow, 54% of you are still seeing that issue of finding qualified talent, and 19% is employees are not having a very good experience. 70% are other. If anybody is willing to kind of, you know, throw in the chat or in the Q&A what the others are, I'd be interesting. But I mean, by and large, it's you know, hey, we can't find good people, and the people that we're bringing on are not having a good experience. My wife is a nurse. She works in geriatrics. And I can tell you, I mean, I'm sure most of you know, it's a massive problem right now. It's a massive, massive problem. They can't find people. And as such, the people that they do hire are overburdened and they get burned out. It's a big issue. All right. So given that information, I'm going to try and tailor some of this stuff to helping find better qualified talent.
Nick, we have someone in there that just stated that finding and retaining staff is a huge problem for us in the health and human services industry.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, it aligns with a lot of what we're seeing as well. So I will try and touch on that a little bit more as I go through a lot of this to see how can technology help us with finding and retaining the talent that we are able to find. All right, so we're going to talk about automation and then specifically the value that automation has for nonprofits. So before I dive into it, I kind of wanted to level set with some interesting facts about the nonprofit industry. So most of this information is, from a little bit, the studies that I found were published in like 2013, 2014. So they're a little bit older, but still prove the point that I'm trying to get at. So in 2013, the nonprofit sector contributed $1 trillion to the United States economy. And in 2014, there were $358 billion in donations. And that has gone up significantly. In 2014, if the nonprofit sector were a country, it would be the 16th largest GDP in the world, right? So we're talking significant money, significant economic impact in the nonprofit sector, right? For kind of I'm going to call it an industry group. I don't know, for a vertical, I guess. For a vertical that has that much of an impact, not just on the country, but in the world, you would think that, it would kind of, at least in my brain, like the logical pattern is like, well, surely there's going to be lots of time, energy, effort, and money spent on improving that environment. But what we're seeing is that's not the case. Now, the average IT budget is around $100,000, which is abysmal compared to what the private sector, or I guess I keep saying private sector, I shouldn't say private sector, the for-profit industry has. Because frankly, the public sector has a big IT budget. The for-profit sector has an average of 10% revenue as their IT spend. And so if you've got an IT budget of $100,000 as an average, the average size of a nonprofit is much higher than $1 million a year. And so you start looking at that and you start realizing, wait a minute, there's something's not balanced here. 6 nonprofit leaders were kind of polled in these studies that I was looking at. And the leaders, the average that they felt that they were leveraging technology was at 60% of its capacity. So if you think about that, on average, these nonprofit leaders felt that they were leaving 40% of the investment they have already made. They've already spent the dollars on these technologies. 40% of its capacity is just left on the table, not being leveraged, not helping out their organization at all. 45% of nonprofits don't even include technology in their strategic plan. Whereas in the private sector, it's rare to come across a strategic plan that didn't have technology very heavily embedded in it. And this goes to what kind of the message was in the chat. Pre-COVID, turnover rates were 19%. That's before the crap hit the fan. And across the board, we have seen that turnover rates have drastically increased post-COVID. And so, if turnover rates were 19% back in, I think this particular study was done in like 2015. If in 2015 turnover rates were 19%, what are they now? Right? Like that's terrible, right? So this is just echoing some of the same problems that you found, which is there's a significant amount of money changing hands in the world of nonprofit. And one of the issues that on the outside looking in, I as a consultant can go, you know what? There's some clear issues with turnover, with employee retention, about being we spent so much time and energy finally finding a qualified person, and we bring them on board, and then we burn them out, or they don't have a good experience and they leave and they go somewhere else. Right? Nobody wants that. And so the gap that I'm seeing, right, and that the data is showing us is, well, it's because a lot of it is technology is not being leveraged to create a better experience for your employees and for, right, like enabling your organization to go out and do more good in the world, right? So anyway, I just thought these facts were really interesting, and clearly, obviously, I'm a little bit biased, but I thought it really shone a light on kind of what some of the problem may be. Now, there's no silver bullet in the world of business or technology. There's nothing that can fix everything, but there is a clear kind of trend here, and that is people go into. So I read this specific article, and it was talking about a Doctors Without Borders type of nonprofit organization where people went to school, they spent tons of money being trained up and going and joining this nonprofit with all these high expectations of how much of an impact they were going to be able to make, just to find that the majority of the time that they were out doing their job was like rote, mundane manual work, and it was not fulfilling. Nobody signed up and joined a nonprofit for mundane admin work. Automate the mundane so that the human capital that we have in our organizations can focus on the core mission. That's kind of the takeaway that I want to give today. And technology is such a core piece of that. And the role of technology is very unique. So I grew up as in high school and early college, I was a handyman. That's how I kind of paid for gas and rent and food. I would, as a handyman, it'd be really kind of silly for me to determine before I ever went into a house what tool I needed. And so if I just like walked in with a screwdriver to go fix this person's problem, that seems really stupid. Like, of course you wouldn't do that, right? You'd walk in with a tool bag, right? You'd walk in with all of the tools that you would need so that when the person you're going to help goes and shows you what the problem is, you can reach into your tool bag and pull out the right tool. And again, with physical tools, I feel like it's very intuitive and it makes sense. But so often with technology, we don't treat it that way. We expect this one tool to address all the issues and all the problems in our organization. And that's just frankly not the case. There are a multitude of tools. And this isn't meant to stress you out or overwhelm you. The point I'm trying to make here is that there are different tools that have different jobs. And kind of going back to that 40%, right? Gartner was saying it's going to be a 40-fold increase in total cost of ownership. A big part of that is using the wrong tool for the job or task in front of you. So if I, as a handyman, walked in with a screwdriver and I needed to try and, fix a plumbing issue where I need a wrench, that screwdriver is not going to be very helpful. Now, as a handyman, I have done weird things where I've actually used like screwdrivers to makeshift, wrench. Like, you can make it work, but you know how much more energy and effort and time you're going to expend trying to jerry rig it as opposed to just grabbing a wrench and doing it with the right tool. We see the exact same thing all the time in the world of business, where we have what we have and we're using that to try and solve every problem. And so, obviously, right, like a consultant like myself who has kind of dedicated my career to understanding this space, I can pretty quickly and easily go in and say, like, that's kind of the wrong tool, right? So there are these tools out there that do these things better, and we can help guide you and help you understand what the right tools are for the job. And so looking at here, this is what Gartner says are the 5 main tools. I'm not talking brand names. I'm talking just like the technologies, the tools. There are 5 main technologies that are out there that help with automation. RPA, which is robotic process automation, and a very quick explanation on what RPA is. Think, I have to go in and type this into my system. There's no, right, I've already looked into it. There isn't like an API I can use. I can't do a bulk file upload or something like that. I have to physically type it in. pretty common issue with kind of older legacy technologies. Well, RPA, robotic process automation, essentially hijacks your mouse and your keyboard, and it'll move the mouse, the clicker, it'll click on buttons, it'll type on the keyboard for you. It imitates a person sitting there at the computer entering stuff in. Um, Very, very powerful when applied correctly. And then you've got built-in workflow tools, you've got low code, right? So like the ability to quickly build applications. I've got an integration platform to tie systems together. I've got an IBPMS, which is business process management. So, kind of the coordination of all these different things that need to happen and tying into, for example, communication platforms. So think onboarding for an employee, right? When I onboard a new employee, they need a computer, they need the right software installed, they need to have the right securities and permissions, their manager needs to verify their pay, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen. And how many of you have either experienced or heard of like starting a job and you don't have a computer yet? One of my first jobs at a larger corporation, I showed up for my first day at work and I did not have a computer yet. I had to wait 5 business days. So I spent the entire first week without a computer, literally sitting there spinning my thumbs with nothing to, like twirling my thumbs with nothing to do. That's not a good experience, right? And if you think about somebody joining, it's even worse for a nonprofit, because I don't, typically speaking, right? Like I'm not joining a nonprofit just to pay the bills. I'm there because I want to make a difference. I want to make an impact. And if my first impression is this organization doesn't have their stuff together, they couldn't even get me a computer, how are they going to go out and help change the world? Like, so those types of things become very important. And that's what the BPMS portion is like coordinating that business process of onboarding. So as soon as, right, like, hey, the hiring manager says, yes, I want to hire them, kicks off a background check, sends off an automation to HR to get a letter out to them. It generates the letter for them and automatically putting in, right, like the name and the salary information, stuff like that. And then when they accept, it automatically kicks off the process to, right, send something to the IT department to provision a computer, right? That, or orchestrating that whole process, that's the BPMS portion. All right, poll question number 2. How much of your time each month is spent on manual tasks? So just, stuff that, frankly, anybody can do this. It's very rote manual. I got to do it over and over again. A pretty common one is like taking stuff off of like paper forms. So like somebody fills out a piece of paper at a booth, right? So like, let's say you go to the school to try and get people to, register to vote or something, right? So you're at a college campus and you have kids filling out forms, and then you go back and you have to like look at these handwritten forms and physically type them in to a machine or to a computer, into a system, so that you can start reaching out to that person to help, right, with the rest of the process. That something like that would be considered a manual process. How much of your time every month is spent on those manual tasks? So I want to put that in perspective real quick. 37% of you are 11 to 25%. That's 92 to 210 hours per person every month on what would be kind of like rote manual tasks. 92 to 210 hours every month per person. Now, you can't automate everything, right? You'll never get away. You'll never be able to. Well, you could, but you would spend so much time building all those automations that you would never get a return on that investment. And 36% of you are saying you're spending somewhere between 211 and 420 hours doing every month doing manual stuff. So I think there's no question there's a lot of opportunity to kind of reduce the manual labor. And I think I speak for everybody when I say that that manual portion of your job, that's not the fun part, right? Like that's not what we all signed up to do. And if we could take that away, your job could be a lot more fulfilling. You could spend more time doing things like analyzing the data to figure out, okay, well, gosh, we seem to have more traction when we go to these types of events, or we have more donors in this sort of kind of category. Maybe we should target this demographic, right? Things like that. Or we don't have donors in this demographic. Maybe we need to put more effort into focusing, right? Those are the types of things where it's fulfilling because what you're doing results in actual impact. So anyways, why do we invest in these technologies, right? So what's the point? Everything that I've talked about, this isn't new stuff. We've been doing this forever in the world of business. So what's new and different about the technologies that are available now compared to what developers were doing a while ago? And the long and the short of it is it's faster and it allows you to be more agile as a company. You can spin up and change and modify and shift faster on these than you can any other way. So I enjoy sports. My knees are terrible. I've had multiple surgeries and multiple injuries over the years, and I'm not at the point anymore where I can go out and just play basketball or soccer or football or anything like that without paying a price for the next several weeks. And so I was looking for something to channel kind of the competitive side of me that was less impact on my knees specifically. And so, like jumping and cutting in with football, right? That sort of stuff was really hard. But boxing, I started kind of looking into it. And boxing was comparatively much easier on your knees, lower impact. And so I decided to give it a shot. And I don't know, male ego, right? I guess I just, for whatever reason, thought that I was going to be this amazing boxer, that it was going to come intuitively because I played sports my whole life. But I got in the gym and I absolutely got my butt handed to me. And it was one of the most frustrating things ever in my life, right? Like as a kind of a more mature, grown adult and a very large male ego thinking I'm going to come in and just like dominate to get rocked as bad as I did, as quickly as I did, was extremely humbling. And I looking back, it's like, why did you think you were just going to walk in and be great? Because it's a sport like anything else, right? There are skills and habits and reflexes that need to be developed, that if you haven't spent time honing those skills, you're just not going to be as good as somebody who has. And for whatever reason, that didn't click for me. But what was interesting, and what my problem was I'd watched too many Rocky movies, right? And everybody thinks like, boxing's all about that big, huge knockout punch. And I couldn't be further from the truth, right? If you look at, that my gym had like a sign on the wall, and the sign said speed kills. The boxing fundamentals, the things that they teach you about speed, about quick feet, and about balance. Those are the things that they're trying to teach you. Because if you can move your feet quickly, you can stay balanced. If you can stay balanced, you can be fast. And at the end of the day, speed is what wins. Speed and agility, not power. And one of the greatest examples of that is Muhammad Ali, right? The greatest of all time. His mantra, or whatever you want to call it, wasn't hit like a sledgehammer, right? It was float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, right? He was famous for being fast, for being insanely fast. That's what he was famous for. And I think this picture perfectly explains why it's important and why it was so beneficial for him to be fast and balanced and have those really, really quick feet. So on the left-hand side of this picture, you have the opponent who's taken that big, rocky type swing and missed. Now, Muhammad Ali was able to move his feet quickly, move his body quickly because he was balanced. And now if you look, this opponent who has overswung is now completely exposed. And Muhammad Ali is balanced and in a perfect position to take advantage of the opportunities in front of him. All right, he's got a clear shot to the ribs, he's got a clear shot to the head. And that's because he was balanced. That at its core is what these technologies are enabling us to do. We're able to build integrations, build reports, build automations faster than ever before. And it's important to move fast because the environment and the economy around us is changing faster than ever, right? If you find out that there is some event that you need to go participate in and you don't have very much time to prepare, that ability to shift gears and quickly prepare for that event is incredibly important, right? If you are on a crunch to raise funds for some event or something like that, you don't want to, right? Like, there's a very real, like, constrict. It's like when you're trying to process all that, right? Like the funds and get donors, right? There's a very real time constraint. That's the word I was looking for. There's a very real time constraint that you can often find ourselves in, and the ability to move quickly, right? That is what helps with that burnout experience, because you're able to, you're not in that like insane crunch at the end. So when I was in college, I used to volunteer and help out with elections, local elections, and I will never forget the 20-hour days that we would put in for multiple days leading up to one of those events. And the stuff that I was doing was the most ridiculous manual work, right? Like, I was getting paid for it, so it was fine, but I also hated it, right? I didn't last very long at that job because it was like, this is so dumb, right? They have, like, again, the feeling is like, you know, as somebody's like, I know I'm making money. I can make money somewhere else, and frankly, I can probably make better money somewhere else. But I believe in kind of the power here of elections and local government and, you know, all that sort of stuff. And so I wanted to do this, but it was so dang painful when it came to election time that I didn't even last 1 year in that job. I had to move on and do something else because it was, I mean, there's only so many of those, like, you know, 20, you know, 3 or 4 20-hour days in a row is brutal. And there's only so many of those that you can do before you just like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. So anyways, staying balanced, staying agile, being able to quickly build out these things to improve your business as kind of the landscape around you shifts. COVID being another good example, right? All right, everybody go home, but keep working. Well, you can't just go home and keep working. You need to have infrastructure in place to help me with that. So anyways, the ability to build that stuff is really where these tools shine. And they do that through low code user interfaces. So instead of having to write physical code where it's like, you know, you got to understand all the syntax, like the curly bracket, exclamation point, semicolon, right? You don't need to know all that. You need to be able to logically think through a business flow and, right, graphically set things up. What you're doing is you're opening up your talent pool, right? So I don't need some master developer to build out these automations anymore. I need an analyst. I need somebody who's business minded. And these tools are set up to be intuitive enough for people to go figure it out. All right, another poll question. How many of you suffer from bad data in your organization? So I'm not going to leave this one on very long because I want to get to the use case.
Oh,
sorry.
Oh, that didn't give them enough time to
Sorry about
to
that.
answer. Let me see if I can redo that. Oh,
So I'm going to go ahead and click forward again.
okay.
All right. So we've determined that 19% of you are liars. I'm just kidding. But bad data, bad data is prevalent. Every organization has data in their systems that's bad, and it really starts to get flushed out when you do automations, when you do integration, when you start building reports, you start to see where that data is bad. A really good, I'm not going to belabor this, but bad data is prevalent, right? Everybody's dealing with it. And there's a very interesting scientific reason why we suffer from bad data when we start doing manual processes. So the human brain, what separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom is pattern recognition. So this was an article published by the Frontiers in Neuroscience. The essence of our evolved brain is the ability to recognize patterns and offload processing to a different part of the brain to carry out that execution. Like pattern recognition is everything. So you've got three sections of your brain. Neocortex, right? That's the higher order thinking. Your limbic brain, which controls emotions and the execution of, right, a process when you understand, okay, this is the pattern, here's what I need to do. We are programmed to be very energy efficient. And that neocortex part of our brain is wildly energy hungry. It's a power saw, right? Like it uses a lot of power, a lot of energy. The limbic brain uses way less energy. And so because we're programmed to be energy efficient, our neocortex identifies a pattern, offloads it to the limbic brain as soon as it can. A really good example of this is getting in the car to go to, dinner and accidentally making the wrong turn and heading towards work, right? That like, oh shoot, I was on autopilot. I made the wrong turn. We've all done it. That is your neocortex identifying a pattern. Oh, I'm going to work, and offloading it to your limbic brain, and your limbic brain making an action. So when you're doing manual work, our neocortex will start to pick up on patterns and offload that work to the limbic brain. We are no longer, frankly, paying attention. We're running on autopilot. We don't even know it, but we're running on autopilot, and then we end up putting in wrong information, making wrong clicks, right? There is a scientific reason why, frankly, humans suck at manual work. We're really, really bad at it. Manual, repetitive work is what we are worst at doing. Computers, however, like if you plug in the restaurant to your GPS, it will literally never accidentally take you to work. Never. And so kind of the idea here is let's figure out what those manual, repetitive, high risk activities are, and let's offload that to the computer. And the complex, there's no clear-cut answer, right? What I do here really depends on XYZ variable. That's the sort of thing that we need to leave for the humans to do. So we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that are facing, right, the market right now. We've talked a little bit about kind of, and I know we're scratching the surface, but kind of automation, the role that it plays, how there isn't like one technology that's going to solve all of it, but you got to understand your problem and pick the right technology. And we've talked a little bit about some of the benefits. We can move faster. We're going to be a lot more accurate when these technologies are leveraged correctly. So what does that look like in the 501c3 space? Well, here's a couple of examples. So acknowledgements. So this organization, right, they were compiling and sending 501c3 acknowledgements to donors, and it was a very manual, very tedious process. They were pulling information out of their system that they were recording all the donations in and putting it in an Excel document, using an Excel document to do this manual mail merge, and then they were printing stuff off, stuffing envelopes, sending it off, so on and so forth. It was a very cumbersome process. A lot of time spent at the beginning of every year doing these acknowledgements. Well, the solution that we were able to get in place was to leverage some technology to automatically pull that donor transaction data from their donor management system. And then it would use these templates to autofill all those donor acknowledgement letters and create PDFs. And those PDFs could be automatically wrapped up as an attachment in a personalized email that was sent out through their email address. So not through like some third party that gets caught up in spam filters, but through their actual domain email address to anybody that was wanting to get a virtual form. And that way, right, like anybody who needed a paper form for whatever reason, we were able to take that digital information and send it to a mailing company who was able to print it out and send it for us. Saved a ton of time and a ton of money because they weren't, right, like they weren't having to pay hourly employees to do all this work, right? It was all very quickly automated. So that was one of my favorite examples. I think it's a really cool one because I'm sure almost all of you on here can sympathize with the challenge that can be sending out those acknowledgments. All right. Next one is donor information collection. So I kind of touched on this example, but capturing potential donor information at events on pieces of paper that then need to be brought back and typed into a system and put into, right, like some sort of like marketing campaign or something so you can start reaching out and trying to get donations out of them. That was a manual process that was fraught with errors between the person entering the information having bad handwriting to not interpreting things well to fat fingering and accidentally clicking something to losing a piece of paper or coffee getting spilt on it and you can't read that person's phone number anymore. All those types of things, it happens. And so what we were able to do for this particular client is leverage a low-code tool to build a very simple, straightforward user interface. It was not complex. It didn't take very much time. It was very out of the box, but we were able to kind of throw on some collection fields, right, on this like digital form, put it on an iPad. They had 2 or 3 iPads they took to this event, and they were able to give people the iPad, and they were able to type their stuff in digitally. Or we had a QR code where if they didn't want to use the iPad or they had a bunch of people there, they could use their own phone to scan the QR code and type their information in on their phone and submit it. And what that allowed us to do is it reduced the barrier to entry, right? Specifically the QR code made it really easy, right? Oh, I'm busy, I got to run to class. Okay, well, just scan this, right? Do it later. And so you kind of reduced friction for people being able to, right, at least take that first step of having it pulled up on their phone. And then, right, phones have autofill, right? Like you've made it much easier to put that information into your system. And they're entering it directly. So the chances of it being accurate go up as well. So the volume of bad data went down drastically. We were also able to do things like verify correct email address, right? So if somebody mistypes or misspells their .cm instead of .com at the end of their email address, it's going to catch that and throw an error and say, this isn't a valid email address, and they can go back and fix it or update it. And so you start implementing those types of things, and now you're validating and verifying information, at least as best you can on the front end. You've reduced the barrier to entry, so you've made it easier for them to give you their information. And you've reduced all the manual labor required for getting that information into your donor management system. So whatever was entered on that tablet flowed right into their system. It was automatically tagged to the event and the appropriate campaign internally. And now I can see, now that starts to open up the doors, right? Okay, well, everything was automatically tied to this campaign, right? This thing that we set up in the back end to track how much we spent on this event and what the results were. And so now I can go back, because I have all this information, I can say, all right, well, at this event, we got, 100 donors to give us the information. And at this other event, we only got 25. But of the 100 donors, only 5 donated. Of the 25, 20 donated. So now I can start making educated decisions around what I need to do to, target the right demographics, what types of events are effective, right? I can now work much, much smarter because of the data that I put in, of the data that I was able to collect, because everything was digital, and it just made it easier, right? It just made everything more seamless. So, anyways, I'm going to move on to the next one, which is reporting. Maya, I don't know if you're seeing some of these messages, but I'm
It
assuming that you can.
appears. I will answer him on that. You're fine.
Okay, perfect. So we just got a couple minutes left. I want to finish um, this last one, which is reporting. And I talked a little bit about this earlier, but essentially, we had a bunch of, this client had a bunch of data in different silos, so different databases, different softwares, and it made kind of creating a report to get a holistic view into what was going on with their organization difficult. And at the time, they were manually downloading these reports from these different softwares and merging that data in Excel to create pivot charts. And so it was a pretty labor intensive way to create these reports. And there was a lot of bad data, because a lot of the data was very stale by the time it made it into that report. And some of it was just bad from mistakes made in the manual process. And so what we're able to do is leverage a couple of different technologies to automatically pull data from all these different systems into a proper data analytics kind of environment, where we're able to create reports that were that had appropriate data. Not all data needs to be near real time. Some does. And so depending on the data that was needed for these reports, some of it was being pulled in real time, so they had accurate near real-time insights. Some of it was as accurate as it needed to be at a day old, a week old, whatever it was. But the point being, they now have one place to go. They had insight to all the data on all their different systems, and they didn't have to manually go grab any of it. And it allowed them to be very smart about where they spent their time and energy and their donor funds to maximize the good they were able to do and to maximize future donations. So with that, the last poll question here is just about if you're wanting to learn more. So I recognize that today was pretty quick and pretty high level. This is a very deep topic. There's a lot going on, a lot I can talk about. This is the biggest, or if you want to learn more, or if you want to can you give me a demo of what this looks like? Can you show me what some of these automations can do? We would love to hop on the phone with you, walk you through it. So feel free to answer yes if you want somebody to reach out, or no if you're good and you can take it on your own from there.
And if you are a participant that missed polling question 3, answer this polling question 4, please. Okay, we'll let it get to about 95 to 96% before we go to the next slide for this one. And if you have any other questions, you can definitely place that in the Q&A. The Q&A box, sorry.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, I wasn't able to go over the last slide, which was just like some tips and tricks, but I believe I will be sending this PowerPoint out, and so you'll have that still, the documentation as well. And so if we come over here, just really quick, right? Repetition is key for which process you should automate. The more you do it, the easier it is. The better candidate it is for automation. Um, Documentation is huge. If you can't write it down, there's no way you're going to be able to tell a robot or a computer how to do the job. And you can build the coolest thing in the world, but if nobody's using it, it's useless. So driving adoption and expansion of using that functionality, that's got to be key kind of in your mind. And then that 40x increase in ownership, good architecture, which includes using the right tools, and then something called governance. That's a whole hour topic on its in and of itself, but those are really important. And so again, if this is something you're interested in or taking on internally, and you want to talk to somebody about governance, we're happy to help. Feel free to reach out. But yeah, I think that is all I had today. Hopefully today was helpful, and appreciate it.